Hubris is a Greek word that means dangerously overconfident. Based on my research, hubris fairly describes our current response to the issue of climate change. Here's what many people believe. 1. The planet is warming catastrophically because of certain human behaviors. 2. Thanks to powerful computers, we can project what the climate will be like 20, 40, or even 100 years from now. And 3. That if we eliminate just one behavior, the burning of fossil fuels, we can prevent the climate from changing for as long as we like. Each of these presumptions, together the basis of our hubris regarding the changing climate, is either untrue or so far off the mark as to be useless. Yes, it's true that the globe is warming, and that humans are exerting a warming influence upon it. But beyond that, to paraphrase a line from the classic movie The Princess Bride, I do not think the science says what you think it says. For example, government reports state clearly that heat waves in the U.S. are now no more common than they were in 1900. Hurricane activity is no different than it was a century ago. Floods have not increased across the globe over more than 70 years. Greenland's ice sheet isn't shrinking any more rapidly today than it was 80 years ago. Why aren't these reassuring facts better known? Because the public gets its climate information almost exclusively from the media. And from a media perspective, fear sells.
What's going on, everyone? It's Dr. Kenny here today, and we're going to be analyzing the inconvenient truth about climate change. I know this is going to be might be a controversial one because, the science is not settled on this. A lot of people have their opinions. A lot of people have their beliefs about this. In my view, climate change is almost the closest thing to a religion that I have seen in a long time, right? Because a lot of people are saying that, we're the America's the least religious it's ever been in history, right? And the Bible, and I'm not trying to Bible thump, but I grew up in the church. There was this verse that always made me realize, humans, there's nothing different from our ancestors 200 billion years ago, however far back you want to go, because being a human being is constant. And it seems like it's in our nature to want to believe in something greater than ourselves. Stuff is going from, because if you don't agree with what the science claim that the other side claims it does, they call you a climate change denier. When if you look out throughout the history, and this is one of the reasons why I don't trust people who are climate alarmist, is because I work with computers. Some people may or may not know, and I know that if your data set or your predictive models are based on false assumptions, then you're going to get a wrong prediction. And that's what's been happening in the past 70 years. Climate change is not something new, right? They've been talking about how we're all going to go into blue steam in the 1900s. I forget, but there's so many climate change claims that have been proven wrong time and time again. There's a claim in the year 2000 that it's going to be so hot that we'll evaporate in blue steam. I forget what else. Some baby boomers can tell me what was their climate change, but it seemed like every generation the media is trying to put this idea that the climate is changing at a rapid rate and that we need government to come in and save us from a crisis. Because end of the day, the only way a free people will be willing to give up their freedom is through a crisis or fear. And that's what it seemed like the climate change alarmist or the climate change hysteria is really about. Climate change seems to be, hey, let's justify more government power. How can we justify that? Let's make the people fear something. Now you got these new terms like climate anxiety. Never existed before. Climate change has been around for a long time if you're a millennial or Gen Z. And now we're just starting getting climate anxiety. This is some ridiculous ish. But hey, I digress. Don't let me say it. Let's listen to someone from Greenpeace.
Only constant is change. That's true about life, and it's true about the climate. The climate has been constantly changing since the Earth was formed 4.6 billion years ago. For example, in just the past 2,000 years, we have seen the Roman warm period, when it was warmer than today. Then came the cooler Dark Ages, followed by the medieval warm period, when it was at least as warm as today. Then we had the Little Ice Age that drove the Vikings out of Greenland, and most recently, a gradual 300-year warming to the present day. That's a lot of changes, and of course, not one of them was caused by humans. During the past 400,000 years, there have been 4 major periods of glaciation, meaning that vast sheets of ice covered a good part of the globe, interrupted by brief interglacial periods. We are in one of those periods right now. This is all part of the Pleistocene Ice Age, which began in earnest 2.5 million years ago. It's still going on, which means that we are still living in an ice age. That's the reason there's so much ice at the poles. 30 million years ago, the Earth had no ice on it at all. So then what about carbon dioxide, the great villain of the global warming alarmists? Where does that fit into this picture? Not as neatly as you might think. Temperatures and carbon dioxide levels do not show a strong correlation. In fact, over very long time spans, periods of hundreds of millions of years, they are often completely out of sync with one another. Over and over again, within virtually any time frame, we find the climate changing for reasons we do not fully understand.
Ooh, hey, that's an important point. There's no correlation between carbon dioxide levels and global warming. Based on that graph, like you can go look it up, but a lot of this assumptions, because then that's what science is. Science is you have a theory and you're testing it in reality. And it seems like the reality is that climate change is not as clear cut as many of these climate alarmists. Well, that's why I'm gonna call them. They're not climate scientists. They're climate alarmists. Like journalists, media that have nothing. They don't know nothing about climate. They're not scientists. They're not scientifically aware about this climate. Yet they're here trying to tell you how you should react. Oh, we should no longer have fossil fuels. This idea that global warming is such an existential threat to human beings, I find that as just fear mongering at this point, right? And then the people would like the same people who are so pro climate change, they don't want to address the fact that, hey, climate's been changing throughout the history of the earth. What's so different than now? Oh, because we're more technologically advanced? That's hubris, which I alluded to in the beginning of this video. That you think you know what the earth should be instead of accepting the earth for what it is. It changes all the time, right? And people, some of my followers may use the point, oh yeah, you're right about climate change, Kenny. It's winter, summer, fall, and spring, right? To me, I'm like, yo, change is constant. And I agree with the second clip. Change is constant. And you don't get to arbitrarily decide, oh no, this is how Earth's supposed to be. It's supposed to be this way, this temperature. And you have no control over that. Yet I want to digress because it seemed like climate change, the only climate solution it seems to be is to use less energy. That seems to be what clean energy means. Clean energy means use less energy, use less fossil fuel, use less this, because then it'll save the planet. But at what cost? I forgot this guy's last name, but he has a book called Fossil Future, and he makes the arguments about some of the negative consequences of shifting away from fossil fuel too soon. Let's take a look.
Crisis, one that will ruin whole economies and lead to needless suffering and death. The crisis is related to climate change, but not in the way you're probably thinking. It's the global energy crisis, a man-made crisis created by climate change policies. These policies have led to a shortage of fossil fuels, oil, coal, and natural gas, the fuels that provide over 80% of the world's energy. A shortage of anything leads to higher prices. That's just basic economics. Fossil fuel shortages have led to higher energy prices. And because the energy industry powers every other industry, this has led to higher prices of almost everything, everywhere. We are already seeing the consequences. Inflation. Inflation spares no one, but those who live paycheck to paycheck suffer the most. Every purchase becomes a major decision. Inflation in the US in 2022 was around 8%. In the UK, 10%, and in many developing countries, much higher. The leading driver of this inflation has been the cost of energy. Deadly winters. Contrary to popular belief, far more people die from cold than heat. Saving lives from the danger of cold requires low-cost, reliable energy. Without it, people on the margins can't adequately heat their homes during the harsh winter months. Even in wealthy Europe, literally thousands will die for lack of energy.
Yeah, and this is the kind of the consequences of the climate change policies. Climate change policies, they have this arbitrary number. Oh, we want to be net zero emissions at 2050 or something like that. And 80% of the world needs fossil fuels to operate their economy, right? And this is some of the arguments that these climate change people don't want to accept because, like what the beginning of the clip started, the science doesn't say what you think it says. Oh, we have hotter summers. Yeah, and then if you look back, you'll see a trend of, oh, it's 2 degrees higher, 2 degrees lower, 2 degrees higher, 3 degrees lower. Like you can see and to me, I'm like, yo, Earth, time, people have never been something stagnant and predictable like that. Like it's never been like that. So I don't understand where they get this idea that nothing changed, like the climate's not supposed to change. Like what is correct climate change? On what period are you basing the perfect state of the climate? The actual state of the climate. This should be the real climate of of Earth. Earth had no ice caps. Now it has ice caps. So if Earth doesn't have ice caps, now is that a bad thing? Like where are you basing this on? And that's what I'm saying. All this feels very arbitrary. It seems like it's arbitrarily used to justify more government control. But I digress because I want to touch out this last point. This is going to be the final clip of Inconvenient Truths about climate change. And he really is going to go in on the fact that solar and wind cannot replace adequately the energy that we use today. Because remember, 80% of the globe uses fossil fuels for its energy. Let's take a look.
Use fossil fuels. They say we're in a climate crisis. But while climate change, humans impacting climate, is a real thing, climate crisis is not. The world is slowly becoming warmer at a cold point in geological history when many more people die of cold than of heat. This doesn't at all justify rapidly restricting global fossil fuel use. Fossil fuels actually make us far safer from climate by providing low-cost energy for the amazing machines that protect us against storms, protect us against extreme temperatures, and alleviate drought. Climate disaster deaths have decreased 98% over the last century. The only rational approach to reducing fossil fuels' climate impacts is a long-term one based on developing truly competitive, reliable forms of energy, most promisingly nuclear energy. Unfortunately, instead of taking this rational approach, governments declared a climate crisis and started immediately restricting fossil fuels, with no viable replacement. They pretended that solar and wind could somehow replace fossil fuels. But since these fuels are inherently unreliable, they can go to near zero at any given time, there was never any reason to believe this. Now we're suffering the consequences of their folly.
Yep, and I don't know if you guys get the theme yet. This theme about the inconvenient truth about climate change is based on hubris. This idea that you knows what's best for the earth, that you know what is the perfect state of the world. And it all revolves around what? You, self-centered individuals, egotistical scientists, right? And this is kind of the drawback of a circular society, a non-religious society, that if they don't worship something other bigger than themselves, they end up worshiping themselves. And based on their personal view, this is how the climate is supposed to be. We have some influence, I can admit that, but to create this hysteria like me driving my car all around the world and back is going to somehow make the world so much more warmer. Like us as a people will make the world so much warmer. I don't really buy that because I don't see the effects, right? All I see is climate alarmists after climate alarmists making bold claims. What's the name? I forgot her name already. Thunberg saying we're going to die in 12 years. How dare you? And then the 12 years is here. And I'm like, oh, we still here, huh? You can tell I don't scare easy. That's how I'm going to put it. I don't scare easy. You can't like fear monger me into a position. Give me the actual facts about it. Oh, we're 3 degrees warmer. Okay. But 98%, like we die less of climate disasters than we do today versus the last century. If climate disaster related deaths was increasing, you might have a point, but it seems that's not to be the case. People would like to point into property damage. Oh, look at how much property damage is caused by hurricanes. It's more than it was a couple years ago. Well, there's more buildings. Our cities are more developed. So therefore the properties are more expensive. And that's probably what's causing the high increase in property damage due to climate related damages, right? Like the hurricanes. This is why every time a hurricane comes to Florida, everyone wants to politicize it. And this is why I start to think that a lot of this climate change stuff is politicized to justify more government power, aka to usher in socialism, because socialism is the only system where government can come in and unilaterally save us from this crisis, because you can't leave it up to individuals. So I already seen this history, and they kind of told on themselves. And now they expect to have the same credibility, especially when you've been wrong for 70 plus years about all climate change predictions. Craziness. Ice cap is going to melt and we're going to go through a big flood. I forget all the climate change. But there's a list of failed climate change predictions. And you think making another climate change prediction is going to convince people. Sometimes this is why I believe that there's nothing new under the sun. It's just a new generation equals a new global hustle. And I think this is what climate change ends up being. It's a hysteria. I'm not saying it's fake, but it's a hysteria. Because it seems like climate change is Earth's natural state, right? Things don't stay the same. Things change, ebbs and flows. Change is constant. But for some reason, now the media is trying to put this framing that as if change is wrong. But we go through 4 seasons every year. But climate change is wrong. That's what I can't seem to balance in my head. But hey, I digress. I've been going out for it for a while. I do appreciate you guys for watching to the end of the video. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I really do appreciate it. And I'll catch you guys on the next Inconvenient Truths. Peace.